Time passed uneventfully at Hogwarts. Harry tried to stay away from Gilderoy Lockhart and Colin Creevey, and Ron's wand kept muddling spells. Early one Saturday morning, Oliver Wood woke Harry up for a crack of dawn practice. Harry got dressed quickly and, on his way to the locker room, ran into Colin, who eagerly asked him to explain the rules of Quidditch, which he did. The team spent a long time in the locker room and went outside to practice, where they were watched by Ron, Hermione, and Colin. Wood began to suspect that Colin was a spy for Slytherin. The Slytherin team entered the field, disrupting the practice and angering Wood. Draco Malfoy stepped up and made disparaging remarks about Fred and George's broomsticks. Hermione defended them, and Malfoy called her a mudblood, causing Ron to cast a spell on him. The spell reversed, causing Ron to belch slugs. Harry and Hermione took Ron to Hagrid's cabin, where Lockhart was bidding farewell to Hagrid. Hagrid cheered up when he saw the students and offered to help with Ron's slug belching. The students recounted out the story, and Ron explained what mudblood meant. Hagrid changed the subject and asked Harry for an autographed photo. Harry was called to do his detention for the flying car incident, while Ron was tasked with polishing trophies. Harry was called to help Lockhart answer fan mail in his office. While addressing envelopes, Harry heard a creepy voice saying, "Come to me! Let me rip you! Let me tear you!" And he jumped up, alarmed. However, Lockhart claimed to have heard nothing. The chilling voice haunted Harry for the rest of the evening. As October arrived, bringing rain, Quidditch practice continued. One evening, as Harry was walking back through the castle corridors, he encountered nearly Headless Nick, the not-quite-beheaded Gryffindor ghost. Nick was looking gloomy, and Harry asked why, only to hear Nick explain that he had just been rejected from the Headless Hunt, because his head was unable to come all the way off. The conversation ended abruptly as they were spotted by Mrs. Norris, Filch the caretaker's cat. Nick warned Harry to hurry off so as not to get in trouble for tracking in mud. Filch spotted Harry and dragged him into his office, began to write up a punishment complaint, but was interrupted by a large crash. Filch rushed out. While he was gone, Harry peeked curiously into an open envelope on the desk and found a mail-order course for wizards who were not fully magical. He returned it before Filch returned, gleefully telling his cat that Peeves the poltergeist will certainly be expelled for damaging a valuable cabinet. Filch stopped mid-sentence when he noticed that the envelope was so close to Harry's elbow, and he asked hysterically whether Harry had read it. Harry lied that he hadn't, and Filch seemed quite alarmed and let Harry go. Outside, Nick explained that he had told Peeves to cause a distraction, and Harry was quite grateful and asked if there was anything he could do to help with the rejection from the Headless Hunt. Nick replied joyfully that he could attend his 500th Death Day party, taking place on Halloween, and during it mentioned to the other headless ghosts how terribly impressive and frightening all the students found Nick. Harry agreed to come, and he invited Ron and Hermione. On Halloween, the three headed to the dungeons where they heard awful, scratchy music. They smelled rotting food, and they glimpsed hundreds of see-through figures. Nick welcomed them, and they took a look around, watching the ghosts dance and walk through the table of rotting food, trying to taste it. Hermione spotted a ghost from the girls' bathroom, moaning Myrtle, and quickly led her friends away, hoping not to get into a conversation with her. Peeves approached at this point, mentioned having heard the three speaking of Myrtle, and called Myrtle over. Hermione said hastily that they were just saying how nice she looked that night. But Myrtle moaned that they were making fun of her, and she proceeded to list all the attributes they might have mocked. Fat, ugly, moping. Peeves noted that she had forgotten pimply, and Myrtle fled tearfully from the party. Nick arrived at this point, introduced them to the headless head of the Headless Hunt, and the three living students were ready to leave. They hurried off during Nick's speech, and in the passageway, Harry heard an eerie, murderous voice saying that it was time to kill. He tore off in the direction from which it came, his friends close at his heels, and they arrived in a deserted corridor and saw scrawled on a wall, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Then from the ceiling, they saw a stiff hanging cat, Mrs. Norris. Suddenly, the halls rumbled and filled with people coming out of the feast. And Draco Malfoy called out, grinning and delighted, "You'll be next! Mudbloods!" Filch had spied Mrs. Norris hanging from the ceiling and exploded at Harry, accusing him of killing the cat. Dumbledore had appeared at this time and whisked Harry, Ron, Hermione, Filch, and Mrs. Norris away into Lockhart's nearby office, which Lockhart had eagerly volunteered. They sat tensely among all of Lockhart's preening portraits of himself. Dumbledore examined the cat, Professor McGonagall fretted quietly, and Snape sneered. Lockhart reassured them all in his course, reversing expertise, and Filch sobbed. Dumbledore explained that the cat was not dead, but petrified, and that second-year students could not have possibly mastered the magic necessary for that degree of a dark spell. Dumbledore also said that soon the school would have enough grown mandrakes to make a restorative potion, which Lockhart eagerly volunteered to make. Filch was unconvinced and explained that Harry knew he was a squib, a person with no magic power of his own, and therefore attacked his cat. Snape interrupted and said that the three students were in a peculiar place on the night of the Halloween feast. Ron, Harry, and Hermione explained the Death Day party, and Snape asked why they didn't come straight to the feast afterwards. Not wanting to explain about the eerie, disembodied voice, Harry explained that they were tired and wanted to go to bed. Snape did not believe them and recommended that Harry be taken off the Quidditch team until he was ready to tell the truth. McGonagall and Dumbledore quickly said that this would not be necessary. The three students walked up to their dorms. Harry pondered what the Chamber of Secrets could possibly be. Filch kept a close watch on the scene of the crime. Justin Finch Fletchley ran from Harry, seeming to believe that he was the instigator of the crime, and Ginny Weasley seemed in utter terror of everything. In History of Magic class, while Professor Binns, the small, elderly, and boring ghost who taught it, droned on, Hermione raised her hand and persuaded him to explain the history of the Chamber of Secrets. They then learned that the original founders and namesakes of the four houses created Hogwarts as a place to bring up bright young witches and wizards. And all went smoothly until Salazar Slytherin offended the other three by expressing his wish to exclude all Muggle-born wizards from the school. Slytherin left the school over this disagreement, but only after he built a hidden Chamber of Secrets which contained a monster that would wipe out all non-pureblood wizards from Hogwarts. He said that only his heir would be able to control it. The students bombarded Binns with questions until he grew annoyed, said it was all folklore, and returned to the original lesson plan. This knowledge caused Harry to worry, making him question whether he was connected to Salazar Slytherin. The previous year, when he was sorted by the Sorting Hat, it had told him that Slytherin would make him great, but he had ended up in Gryffindor because he did not want to be in Slytherin. As he, Ron, and Hermione walked through a corridor with writing on the wall, speculating about the water that had appeared the night of the attack and observing spiders fleeing through a window, they decided to investigate clues in Myrtle's bathroom. They encountered Percy Weasley, who scolded them for being in a girl's bathroom and for being in a suspicious place, which upset both Ron and Harry. Later that night, they discussed the possibility of Malfoy being the heir of Slytherin, and Hermione suggested that they could find out by making a Polyjuice Potion, which would allow them to transform into Slytherins and overhear Malfoy in the Slytherin common room. Ron and Harry were initially hesitant, but Hermione insisted, saying that she could have a teacher write her a note to check out a book from the restricted section of the library, where the potion recipe would be. After the incident with the Pixies, Lockhart had reverted to role-playing in his dark arts class. Hermione approached Lockhart at the end of class and asked for permission to get a book out of the restricted section of the library in order to better understand the tactics employed in one of his books. Lockhart was very flattered by this attention paid to his works, so he signed the slip, and Harry, Hermione, and Ron hurried into the library where they were given the book. They read about the painful and complicated steps to making and using Polyjuice Potion, and by the end Hermione was the only one still interested in trying to make it, although she persuaded the boys to join her. The Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin had dawned, and during the Gryffindor team pep talk, Oliver Wood reassured his team that while the Slytherins had better brooms, the Gryffindors had better people on their brooms. He then told Harry to get the snitch or die trying. The game began, and as soon as Harry was circling through the air looking for the snitch, a bludger streaked toward him and continued to aim for him, even after knocked away by Fred and George. While the two beaters were protecting Harry, the Slytherins were scoring goal after goal, and during the timeout talk, Harry requested that Fred and George return to the game, allowing him to fend against the rogue bludger for himself while he looked for the snitch. Malfoy, the Slytherin seeker, laughed at Harry for his twirling evasions of the bludger, and while he was laughing, Harry noticed the snitch next to his face. Harry paused, was whacked by the bludger, recovered quickly, and flew at Malfoy, grabbing the snitch and falling out of the sky. Harry won the game but landed painfully, and he was greeted on the ground by Lockhart, who immediately set to repair his broken arm, but made a mistake and deboned it. Harry was sent to the hospital wing where he had to stay the night, waiting for his arm to regrow itself through a lengthy and painful process. During the night, he was visited by Dobby, who explained that he had closed up the train platform and bewitched the bludger. both in hopes that Harry would give up and return home and away from Hogwarts, where his life would be threatened because the Chamber of Secrets had been opened again. Harry perked up at this knowledge, wanting to know more from Dobby, but the house elf was adamant about saying nothing more. And soon footsteps sounded in the corridor and Dobby disappeared. Dumbledore entered with Professor McGonagall, together carrying a stony figure that Harry soon recognized as Colin Creevey, who had been petrified with his camera in front of his face. Dumbledore gravely reiterated what Dobby had said, that the Chamber of Secrets had been opened again. When Harry awoke from his night in the hospital wing, his arm was healed and he was eager to tell Ron and Hermione about Dobby and Colin. He ran into Percy, who looked exceptionally happy, and then Harry headed into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, where he found his friends. Ron and Hermione had spent the morning concocting the beginning of the Polyjuice Potion, and they listened eagerly to the news about Dobby and the reopening of the Chamber of Secrets. Meanwhile, the entire school was all in a fright about Colin. Ginny Weasley was especially shaken up by the occurrence, and Neville Longbottom, a round and clumsy wizard, had started carrying around protective charms since he acknowledged fearfully that he was almost a squib. In potions class, Harry distracted Snape by throwing a firecracker into a Slytherin cauldron, splashing swelling potion on the faces of many students, while Hermione sneaked out of the room to procure Polyjuice ingredients from Snape's personal collection. When she returned with the ingredients inside her robes, the swollen faces were back to normal, and Snape was spitting with rage and looking straight at Harry as he threatened expulsion to the troublemaker. A week later, Harry, Ron, and Hermione spied a poster advertising a new student dueling club, and they went to the meeting to learn to duel. It turned out that Lockhart was heading it, and when he practiced his first dueling match, Snape, his opponent, disarmed him using a spell. Lockhart quickly said that he had deliberately allowed Snape to win that one, and he divided the students into pairs, not wanting to lose another duel. Hermione was matched up with a large Slytherin girl named Millicent, and Harry was matched up with Malfoy. The two boys attacked each other with all sorts of body-contorting charms, including a tickle spell and a leg-jerking spell. The two boys were brought to the front of the room to demonstrate for the entire club, and Snape whispered something to Malfoy, who immediately conjured an angry black snake from his wand. Lockhart tried to help, but instead made the snake angrier and sent it straight for Justin Finch-Fletchley. Without even thinking, Harry called out at the snake to leave Justin alone, and the snake fell into a docile heap on the floor. Harry was relieved, but the class was terrified, and only after class did he find out through Ron and Hermione that he spoke Parseltongue, snake language, a feat for which Salazar Slytherin himself was famous. Harry began to question if, in fact, he really could be the heir. Furthermore, he worried about the Sorting Hat's decision to place him into Gryffindor. The next day, Harry was restless and went to find Justin to explain what had actually happened. But as he looked for him in the library, he overheard several Hufflepuffs, led by Ernie Macmillan, discussing the probability that Harry was the heir and that Voldemort had not succeeded in killing him, only because the infant Harry already had powerful dark protective powers. Harry spoke to the Hufflepuffs and asked for Justin, and they all reacted fearfully and with accusations that angered and annoyed Harry. As Harry returned to his house through the corridors, he ran into Hagrid, who was holding a dead chicken, and soon after he tripped over the stone-hard figure of Justin Finch-Fletchley, lying near the airy, floating figure of nearly Headless Nick. Soon Peeves the Poltergeist saw the scene and cried out. As frightened as Harry felt as he was brought to speak with Dumbledore, he was still deeply impressed by Dumbledore's office. He spotted the Sorting Hat, and while waiting for Dumbledore to emerge from the back room, he tried it on. The hat repeated what it had told him the previous year, that he would have done well in Slytherin. Desperate, Harry tore the hat off his head. His attention fell next on a sickly bird perched near the door, and before he could observe it for long, the bird burst into flames and was gone. Harry yelled, and moments later was reassured by Dumbledore that the bird, Fawkes, was a phoenix, and that the time had come for his burning and rebirth. During this explanation, Dumbledore also mentioned that phoenixes are excellent pets because they are faithful, can carry heavy loads, and can heal injuries with their tears. At this moment, Hagrid burst into the room proclaiming Harry's innocence, and Dumbledore impatiently informed Hagrid that he did not think Harry was responsible for petrifying the students. Hagrid left, and Dumbledore then asked Harry if there was anything that Harry wanted to tell him. Harry considered all of the things currently pressing on his mind, and then answered no. The school was still frightened about the heir, and Fred and George humored the situation by walking in front of Harry in the halls and crying out, "Make way for the heir of Slytherin! Seriously evil wizard coming through!" Harry appreciated this humor because it reassured him that at least the twins thought the idea of him being the heir was laughable. Soon the term ended, and on Christmas Day, Ron, Hermione, and Harry opened their presents and planned for their Polyjuice Potion adventure later that night. The feast was exquisite as always, and afterwards Hermione instructed Harry and Ron to leave 2 sleeping potion-filled cakes in easy places for Malfoy's large, hulking friends Crabbe and Goyle to find, and then to hide them in a closet and pluck out a few of their hairs to add to the potion. Ron and Harry did this, and within minutes the cakes had been eaten, the sleeping bodies hidden, the hairs plucked. Soon they were back in the bathroom with Hermione. Hermione already had her hair, it turned out, because the day she was paired to duel with Millicent, one of the hairs of the large Slytherin girl wound up on Hermione's robes. The 3 friends added their hairs to their respective potions and drank them, and soon Harry was a replica of Goyle, Ron of Crabbe. Hermione refused to come out of her stall, so Harry and Ron set off alone. Unfortunately, they didn't know where the Slytherin common room was, so they wandered around, accidentally asking a Ravenclaw girl, and suddenly they ran into Percy, who was emerging from a side room. They regarded him warily, and he regarded them back just as warily, and finally Ron and Harry were saved by the approach of Malfoy. Malfoy led them through corridors to a black stone wall whose password was Pureblood, which opened into the Slytherin common room. Malfoy was pleased with himself for obtaining a copy of the Daily Prophet, a wizard newspaper, and he showed Ron and Harry an article about Ron's father being fined for bewitching a Muggle car. Ron was furious, but tried to conceal it. Malfoy then spoke of the last attack by the heir, and how a girl was killed, and then how he hoped that this time Hermione would be killed. Then he said wistfully that he wished he knew who the heir was, so that he could help him. And finally he revealed information about a hidden chamber under his family's drawing room floor in which dark wizarding paraphernalia is kept. Ron and Harry were a blank audience to all of this, but Malfoy didn't seem to notice that they were any slower than the real Crabbe and Goyle. After some time, the spell began to end, and Ron and Harry dashed out of the room and back to Hermione, who was still in the stall. Moaning, Myrtle was in delighted humor, and the reason turned out to be because the hair in the potion had turned Hermione into a cat. Ron and Harry persuaded her to go to the hospital wing, while Myrtle gloated in the background. This is the end of part 2. Thank you for staying with us. If you enjoyed the video, please press like, leave a comment, and subscribe. See you soon on Books Recapped.